Poor girl arrives late to take care of her brother. The millionaire overhears and says, "You deserve more than time." And what he delivers leaves the room speechless. The silence in the conference room was cut by a spiteful whisper, followed by muffled laughter. Ali hurried in, her clothes wrinkled and her face still streaked with flour, not from a fancy breakfast, but from a double shift washing dishes at a roadside diner. She clutched a worn briefcase to her chest, as if it could hide the fact that she was 15 minutes late for the presentation of the year. The group's CEO, Donovan Hawthorne, a cool, impeccable man in his tailored suit, stared at her with silent contempt. When she tripped over her bag and nearly fell in front of the board, someone laughed loudly. But it was Donovan who, with an icy voice, cut through the air. "You're late. That says everything about what you have to offer." She tried to explain, breathless, that she had to drop her special needs brother off at school because the caregiver didn't show up. But he held up his hand, interrupting, "You deserve more than time." Then, as if delivering a final sentence, he held out a white envelope to her. When she opened it, the room stopped. It was a check for the exact amount to cover 4 years of college. Ali didn't know what to say, much less what to think. What no one there knew, not even Donovan, is that Ali had been in that room years before. Not as a guest, much less as an employee, but as the daughter of a woman who cleaned the bathrooms in that very building. Back then she hid under tables to do her homework, while her mother swept up tears and dirt from others. One day, it was Donovan himself, still young and arrogant, who accidentally kicked Ali's small backpack in the hallways, knocking her notebooks to the floor and mocking her poorly drawn castle. Now, years later, he was humiliating her again, but with class and businesslike cool. What he didn't know was that that check, that gift of false generosity, would be used by Ali to rekindle something much older than a dream. The desire to bring justice where before there had been only silence. She said nothing. She simply accepted it, looked into his eyes, and smiled with her lips, but not with her soul. From that moment on, the story was no longer about money. It was about memory. Before continuing, I want to invite you to subscribe to the channel and like this video so you can continue receiving our real stories. Thank you very much. The morning sun streamed through the panoramic windows on the 43rd floor of Hawthorne Enterprises, casting a cool light over the marble and polished steel furniture. The silence was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic click of expensive heels on the gleaming floor. Impeccably dressed executives straightened their suits and adjusted slides on screens as the day's tension hung in the air. This was the presentation that would decide the company's new creative leadership, an experimental project to be led by an insider, handpicked by Donovan Hawthorne. He sat at the head of the rectangular table, as still as a bronze statue. His eyes, a piercing grey, swept the room indifferently. He was a man who spoke no more than necessary, and when he did, there was no room for argument. At the other end of the room, Ali ran up the stairs, her heart pounding. Her wrinkled blouse was from an old collection purchased at a thrift store, and her worn sneakers bespoke her origins. Outside that universe, she tried to compose herself in front of the door, tying her hair back with a rubber band and adjusting the backpack containing the drawings and proposals for the project she'd spent nights developing. In the reception area, everyone was already seated. The projection screen displayed her name, Ali Monroe, new vision for the creative sector, and she wasn't there. As she entered, panting, she felt the weight of dozens of eyes on her. The embarrassment was suffocating. One of the managers whispered something that drew quiet chuckles. Ali bowed slightly in apology, but Donovan didn't wait. "You're late," she tried to explain. "Sorry, Mr. Hawthorne, my brother, he's special, the caregiver cancelled, and He held up a hand as if brushing away dust. "It doesn't matter the reason. In the real world, time is of the essence." His voice wasn't loud, but it cut like a razor. Ali sat huddled, her face burning, her heart in despair. The meeting continued. Other projects were presented, cold, calculated, aesthetically perfect ideas. Then it was Ali's turn. With tears in her eyes, she took a deep breath, stood, and walked to the front of the room. Her presentation was different. organic, pulsating, full of social references, outsider art, urban culture, and inclusion. It spoke of emotion, of purpose. But while she was presenting, no one was really listening to her, except one person. Donovan watched her with an impenetrable expression, and finally, as she thanked him with a choked voice, he slowly stood up. The room fell silent. He walked over to her, pulled the white envelope from the inside pocket of his suit, and held it out. "You deserve more than time," he said, handing her the check. Everyone stared in disbelief. Some applauded, thinking it was an act of generosity. Others smiled mockingly, as if to say, "Congratulations on the handout." But Ali simply accepted it, and at that very moment, something invisible broke inside her, and something much stronger began to awaken. Ali Munro never knew what it was like to have an ordinary childhood. Growing up in the grey suburbs of Newark with an exhausted mother and a younger brother with special needs taught her from an early age that dreaming came at a price. Her father abandoned them when she was just 5, leaving behind only bills, empty promises, and an old broken-down bicycle that Ali rode to and from school. Her mother, Marlene, cleaned bathrooms in luxury buildings in downtown Manhattan, including the one where Ali would later be humiliated. At 7, Ali spent entire afternoons sitting in the cold hallways of the 43rd floor, a notebook on her lap, headphones trying to drown out the sounds of expensive shoes passing by as if she were invisible. Her mother let her stay there as long as she remained silent, drawing while scrubbing toilets and smiling at those who never noticed her. Ali's brother Jamie was born with cerebral palsy. He required full-time care, and the limited government assistance was insufficient for therapy and medication. Ali learned to cook at 9, to take care of the house at 10, and to suppress her tears at 11. At school, she was the girl who always wore the same t-shirt, who slept through math class, and who still got the highest grades. It was as if her intelligence was the only way to break out of the bubble of poverty, and she clung to it, tooth and nail. She had a gift for color, shape, and line. She transformed pain into art, abandonment into watercolor, silence into visual composition. When her mother died of a massive stroke at 46, Ali was only 17. She didn't cry at the wake. She held Jamie's hand tightly and whispered, "I promise never to leave him alone." Since then, she's juggled 3 jobs, waitressing at night, delivering on weekends, and freelancing as a designer when she has time. She attended 2 years of college with scholarships and favors, but had to drop everything when Jamie had a severe crisis and spent a month in the hospital. Everything that was hers was put on the back burner. When the internship opening at Hawthorne Enterprises came up, she couldn't believe it. She sent in a digital portfolio created on an old cell phone. She was called. Even without a degree, her talent spoke volumes. But she knew she'd be just another number, an invisible cog in the wheel. And yet, she walked in with her heart held high, not for her future, but for her brother, for her mother, for that Ali kid who drew castles with borrowed pencils. She didn't want charity, she wanted to be seen. What she didn't expect was that the man who would make her bleed in public was the same man who, years ago, kicked her notebook, unaware that the castle scribble was actually a silent cry of hope. On that cloudy Friday, the atmosphere inside the company throbbed with anticipation. The once lukewarm creative department was now buzzing with rumors about a groundbreaking new project. That Donovan Hawthorne, the billionaire with the surgical eye and economics, planned to launch as a legacy of his tenure. The idea was simple. Hold an internal competition and elect, from among all the company's employees, including interns, the one who could present the most impactful visual proposal for the group's new international campaign. The winner would receive a full scholarship, a $20,000 bonus, and a position on the creative board. For many, it was a game. For Ali, a chance to change everything. For weeks, she slept only 3 hours a night. She worked all day at Hawthorne Enterprises, cared for Jamie in the late afternoon, and during the early hours of the morning, she immersed herself in sketches, color palettes, concepts, and the phrases she wanted to convey with her proposal. But there was a problem. Ali didn't have access to the same software as everyone else. She used free, slow, watermark-laden versions, while others presented mock-ups rendered by cutting-edge graphics intelligence. She painted by hand and scanned on her phone. Even so, her proposal was genuine, real. It told the story of invisible people, of the human mechanisms behind profit, of the beauty hidden in the margins. Her art wasn't a layout, it was a manifesto. But among her colleagues, this was a source of ridicule, especially for Jordan, the arrogant intern who flattered his bosses and mocked Ali behind her back. It was he who jokingly proposed a cruel bet during the team lunch. If Ali wins this contest, I'll clean the bathrooms for a week. Now if I win, she serves coffee to the entire board, dressed as a maid. The others laughed. Ali listened and simply smiled with her eyes. She knew exactly where it was coming from and would never be ashamed of it. But what hurt her wasn't the joke. It was the echo of that word. Maid. The same one that defined her mother's life. The one so many there still associated with failure. The bet, initially made. Informally, spread like wildfire behind the scenes. It was as if everyone was waiting for a spectacle. The poor girl facing off against the darling of the corporate elite. The chatter grew so loud that it reached the leadership, including Donovan. But he, as always, remained neutral, just observing, calculating. When it was announced that the final presentation would be made at a general board meeting, the tension became unbearable. Ali showed nothing, but inside her heart was beating like a war drum. The day before the meeting, she was the last to leave the building. She entered the presentation room alone and stuck a small sticker on the corner of the projection screen. It was a clipping from a drawing she'd made as a child, the same one Donovan had kicked years ago. A crooked castle with small windows and a single star in the sky. She hadn't stuck it on for drama. It was a reminder to herself. It doesn't matter who laughs. What matters is where you came from and where you're going. And in that cold room under the dimmed lights, Ali didn't feel afraid. She felt something deeper, as if something was about to be revealed, something even she didn't fully understand. The next morning, the Hawthorne Enterprises building seemed to breathe more heavily. The mirrored elevator reflected tense gazes, and the hallways smelled of expensive perfume and pent-up anxiety. Ali arrived early, as she always did, but this time, instead of hiding silently backstage, she walked with firm steps to the presentation room. Her every move seemed calculated but not strategic. It was the instinct of someone who had spent her life avoiding stumbling where no one wanted her. Donovan was already there. Sitting at the head of the table, his hands clasped together, his eyes as still as glass. It was impossible to tell what he was thinking. His face betrayed no emotion. Behind him, the giant window showed the cloudy New York sky, as if even the city itself was waiting for the outcome. When Ali walked through the door, all eyes fell on her. There was a second of silence. She was dressed simply, but there was something different. Her hair tied tightly, her gaze direct, unafraid. She carried only a backpack, her sketchbook, and a small flash drive. Donovan watched her approach. For a brief moment, a flicker of curiosity shone in his eyes. He hadn't known her name until 3 days ago. To him, Ali was just the intern at the bottom of the list. But when he saw the proposal, shortlisted by the internal committee, something caught his eye. It wasn't just good, it was unsettling, as if the art bore a real open wound, bleeding directly onto the polished glass of his company. She greeted him with a simple, firm, direct, "Good morning." He merely nodded, but he held her gaze longer than he did with the others. It was as if he were trying to decipher her. When the other participants finished their presentations, all impeccable but predictable, it was Ali's turn. She plugged in her flash drive, opened her simple, no-nonsense presentation, and began speaking. But she didn't begin with data. She began with silence. She left the first image static for 10 seconds. It was a monochrome illustration of a woman kneeling, cleaning the floor, with the reflection of a skyscraper in the puddles. Then she showed a set of graphics with phrases like, "Do you remember who serves you coffee? Who cleans your way to the top?" And finally, "Invisible, until you need them." The room fell silent. Ali continued, her voice unwavering. She explained that her proposal was a campaign to reconnect brands and people, a visual repositioning that humanized the company without makeup. She spoke with knowledge, but also with pain. Donovan crossed his arms, his eyes narrowed. It was clear he hadn't expected this. Her courage was slowly disarming him, like an annoying melody you try to ignore, but end up listening to the end. When she finished, there was no immediate applause, just a thick silence. And then he spoke. "Who are you?" he asked, without irony. She replied, "Someone who knows what it's like to clean the floor, while others walk all over it." He fell silent, staring at her. And it was in that instant, in that brief contact, that Ali realized he didn't see her as an adversary. He saw her as an old mirror, showing him something of himself he no longer wanted to remember. The meeting had ended, but the silence still hung heavy inside the glass. Room. The board members exchanged discreet glances, as if unsure how to react to the presentation. Ali, though still standing, felt her legs trembling. Her heart was racing, but her face remained impassive. That was when Donovan Hawthorne slowly stood up, straightened his suit as if preparing for a public address, and walked toward her. The sound of his footsteps echoed like an omen. With his gaze fixed on hers, he removed a white envelope from his inside jacket pocket and handed it to her, with the same ease as delivering a report. "You deserve more than time," he said, his voice dry, almost bureaucratic. Ali hesitated for a second, looking around, uncomprehending. She picked up the envelope with unsteady hands. Opening it, she quickly read the contents and froze. It was a check for exactly $20,000, the same amount announced as the winner's prize. But there was no mention of winning, not even a congratulations. Nothing, just the cold number and his signature in all. The corner. Some directors began to applaud. Others smiled in surprise, thinking it was a noble gesture from the CEO. But not everyone. Jordan, the mocking intern, let out a sarcastic whistle from the back of the room. "Wow, looks like our little maid got a bonus for moving the boss with a sad story." They laughed. Not everyone, but enough to cut the air. One of the managers whispered something like, "At least now she can buy new clothes and stop wearing rags." Another executive, trying to lighten the mood, murmured, "These people are very talented when they're hungry, aren't they?" Ali clutched the envelope to her chest. Her mouth was dry, her face was hot. But she didn't cry. She just looked at Donovan. He stood motionless, watching everything. He didn't correct anyone, he didn't defend anyone, he didn't say a word. His inaction was as loud as any insult. The humiliation didn't come in a scream. It came in silence, in muffled laughter, in the patronizing tone of the fake applause, and most of all in his gaze, not of contempt but of indifference, as if she had been an interesting social experiment, but now concluded. Ali left the room without saying a word. She walked through the halls with her face held high, but her chest burned. In the elevators, some colleagues tried to congratulate her, as if they hadn't just witnessed that. "You were amazing, seriously. So brave," they said, hiding their previously ignored eyes. As she passed the reception desk, Jamie was waiting for her, sitting in a corner chair holding his sketchbook, smiling as if nothing in the world could erase it. She smiled back but said nothing. She simply took his hand, squeezed tightly, and they walked out together. On the sidewalk, the New York wind whipped hard against her face, and in that moment, the only certainty Ali held was that she would never allow that humiliation to define her life. Because, contrary to what they thought inside, she didn't need anyone's approval. She just needed time. And now, she had so much more than that. The following Monday, the city spun as usual, indifferent, noisy, fast. But inside Hawthorne Enterprises, something had changed. Ali Monroe's name circulated through the halls like an uncomfortable whisper. Some said she had quit. Others swore she had been promoted, that the check was a symbolic bonus. But no one knew the truth, not even Donovan. Since the day of the presentation, Ali had not appeared. No response to emails, no activity on the internal system. Her desk was empty. Her badge had been left with the security guard. Gone, like a shadow that should never have been there. However, before she left something behind. A manila envelope with no return address sat on Donovan's desk on Tuesday morning, sealed with black tape. Inside there was no letter, just 3 pages. One was a copy of the same childhood drawing, the crooked castle with the star on top, scribbled in crayon. The second, a screenshot of the creative proposal she'd presented, with the phrase highlighted, "Invisible until you need it." And the third was a photo, an old one, taken by a security camera in the building, dated 12 years ago. In it, a little girl was on her knees, picking up dropped colored pencils from the marble floor, while a young executive walked by, accidentally kicking her pencil case. The executive was him. Donovan froze. That scene came back to him with a vengeance. He vaguely remembered that day. He'd thought the child was just some employee's daughter. He hadn't even looked her in the eye, but now the memory returned with cruel precision. It was the same girl. The features, the eyes, the design. He swallowed hard, leaning back in his chair as if the air itself had become too thick to breathe. For the first time in years, Donovan felt uncomfortable. But it wasn't shame. It was something else. A crack, a chink in his armor. Until that moment, he'd thought Ali was just another emerging talent, a hard-working intern. But now everything changed. She knew, she'd always known. And yet, she remained silent. Still, she presented her project with dignity. Still, she accepted the check without a word of revenge. She didn't expose anyone. She didn't point a finger. She didn't shout. She simply left a memory, a mirror, and disappeared. During lunch, the rumor about Ali's supposed mysterious firing exploded in the company's internal groups. Jordan scoffed loudly as usual. The little girl took the money and ran. Good luck selling art on the sidewalk. But Donovan, for once, wasn't amused. He didn't even force a smile. That night, he didn't go to the business dinner or to the luxury gym. He got into the car alone and asked the driver to take him to an address that remained in his memory like a blur. The old maintenance building, where Ali's mother worked. He stood there, staring at the graffitied facade and the iron gate as if searching for ghosts. When he got out, he walked to the side door. There, the paint almost faded with time. It still read, "Employee restrooms." He didn't go in. He just stood there, breathing the humid air of that forgotten hallway. And there, alone, he whispered for the first time something he'd never said to anyone. She knew all along, and she didn't destroy me. And that, for him, was the greatest defeat. Donovan spent the next few days like a distracted man in a world he had once controlled with pinpoint precision. Meetings no longer held any meaning. The numbers, which had always inspired a kind of silent ecstasy, now felt like empty codes. Something had broken, or perhaps revealed itself. He tried to regain focus, but every time he crossed the glass corridors, he remembered Ali's eyes staring at him during the presentation, the haughty silence with which she accepted the check, the absence of any theatrical gratitude. It disconcerted him. Why? Why had someone like her, given the chance to lay bare her past, chosen silence? Then, one rainy afternoon, something inside him demanded answers. Donovan returned to HR. He asked for the intern's records, something he had never done with any low-level employee. The clerk hesitated. It wasn't a common request, but he persisted. With his authority, the information came. Full name, Allison Monroe. Date of birth, April 6, 1999. Hometown, Newark, New Jersey. The name sparked something in his memory. Monroe, Marlene Monroe, the cleaning lady who had a stroke years ago? The woman who for a time would discreetly disappear from the common areas to pick up her daughter from school. The woman he, Donovan, in his ruthless youth, had personally dismissed after a bout of pressure that delayed the cleaning of the executive floor. Yes, now everything fit. The woman was the mother. And the girl was Ali. Donovan closed his eyes. Images overlapped in his mind like cuts from a brutal film. The little child drawing silently while his mother scrubbed tiles. The day he kicked the pencil case without looking, knocking everything to the floor. The automatic contempt, the condoned invisibility, and later the cold notice of his own dismissal when Marlene missed 3 days of work due to hospitalizations. There was no compassion, no attempt to understand, just numbers, efficiency over dignity. But now that daughter stood before him, years later, not as a beggar, not as a submissive employee, but as an artist, a thinker, a symbol. She never screamed, never said, "I'm the daughter of the woman you fired." No. Her justice was silent, poetic. By handing over that check and receiving only a blank stare, she hadn't lost. She had exposed. Without saying a word, Ali had shown him her own story, the mirror of a system he'd built on exclusion. And he swallowed every reflection without realizing it. Donovan went down to the company's archives that same afternoon. There, among dusty folders and old records, he found Marlene's file. And inside a handwritten note, clipped shut. "I have to leave at 3 p.m. to pick up my daughter. I have no one to leave her with. I promise to make up for the time. I only ask for your understanding." It was never answered, just filed away. Donovan read it dozens of times. Then he sat down in the rusty chair among the files and sat there, motionless. For the first time in years, he didn't feel in control of anything. And he finally understood that Ali wasn't there to win a contest. She was there. To show that even invisible, someone saw everything. Ali's disappearance wasn't immediate, but it was complete. In less than a week, all traces of her vanished as if they'd never existed. Her email account was deactivated. Her social media accounts were deleted. No posts, no location information. Co-workers who had never worried about her presence were now bothered by her absence, but only because something was unresolved. A kind of collective unease hung over the company, as if everyone had witnessed something important but were pretending not to. The truth was, Ali's presentation had touched a nerve. But what really hurt was the way she left, without making a fuss, without asking permission, without warning. Donovan felt this acutely. He tried to maintain his routine, but his mind kept returning to her. For the first few days, he convinced himself it was just curiosity. But what ate at him inside wasn't the disappearance itself. It was the silence she left in its place. It was as if the world had lost a subtle frequency, a background music he hadn't known he was hearing, until it stopped. He began to search for her discreetly. He asked security to check the exit cameras. There was nothing suspicious, just a simple image. Ali, exiting through the front door with Jamie by her side, sketchbook in hand, head held high. That image was etched in Donovan's mind like a painting. No rush, no drama. Just a firm departure, as if she wasn't coming back. He began avoiding the 43rd floor. The space where she'd presented the project now seemed too cold, too empty. He even took the elevator up there alone one morning, trying to understand why it still haunted him. When the door opened, the floor was dark. But deep down, in the corner of the projection screen, the sticker she'd left was still stuck. The crooked castle, the star at the top. Donovan approached slowly, knelt before the wall, ran his fingers over the yellowed paper, and felt something he couldn't name. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't remorse, it was absence. The absence of someone who should have been acknowledged and wasn't. Someone who demanded nothing, but who shattered everything with just his own departure. He began to dream about her. Strange, vague dreams. Sometimes she would appear in the middle of an empty room, drawing on the floor. Other times, he would see her from afar, in a subway station, boarding a train that never stopped. He would wake up sweating, breathing rapidly. He was looking for something, but he didn't know what. He began visiting art schools, cultural centers, and neighborhood fairs. He never found her, but he would always ask discreetly, "Do you know anyone named Ali Monroe?" No one knew. It was as if she had been nothing more than a mirage. Over time, the discomfort turned into emptiness, and the emptiness into longing, a strange longing, nameless, with no romantic story behind it. It wasn't desire, it was necessity, a need to repair something that was no longer reachable. And the more days passed, the more he realized that her absence was, in fact, the strongest presence he had ever felt. The downfall didn't come with scandals. There were no explosive headlines, no cameras at the company's front door. Donovan's downfall began as most silent destructions do, from the inside out. A subtle leak, an invisible crack that widens over time. It all started with a simple post on a professional social network. An anonymous junior employee posted a photo taken discreetly on the day of the presentation. Ali standing, staring intently in front of the boardroom, with the phrase at the bottom of the screen, "Invisible until you need it." The caption was short. The most real presentation this company has ever seen. And no one had the courage to say it out loud. Within hours, hundreds of likes. Within 2 days, thousands of shares. Other employees began to comment, some protecting their identities, others bravely. They commented on the check incident. The muffled laughter, the way Ali had been treated, as if receiving money were enough to erase the public humiliation. Small stories popped up. She washed the dishes in the pantry when the interns left it full. She was always the one to turn off the lights in the room at the end of the day. She never turned in a report late. She never asked for recognition. In less than a week, Ali Monroe became a symbol of something bigger, something that disturbed the perfect foundations of corporate culture, silent denunciation, indignation without a cry, justice built through absence. Donovan tried to control the fire, but there was no fire, only thick, constant smoke. The board demanded a statement. He refused. He said there was no proven fact. The directors began to question his leadership. One of them dared to say, "You have to admit, Don, she beat you. Not at the corporate game, but at the human game." His face hardened, but deep down, he knew. He had already lost much more than credibility. He had lost his very axis, the very thing that sustained his image as an unshakable man. What had been silent admiration turned into cautious observation. The smiles in the hallways disappeared. The forced applause at meetings ceased. They began treating him with the same cold shoulder he'd cultivated for decades. Investors began withdrawing small investments. The press, lacking explosive material, quietly speculated, is the Hawthorne empire losing its touch? What he didn't know was that, at a community arts non-profit in Brooklyn, an exhibition was being mounted featuring drawings by young artists who had lived on the streets. And in the corner of the gallery, among the crooked paintings and garish colors, was a mural signed with a single star, the Castle Star, and the name Ali M., small, hidden at the bottom edge. Those who laughed were now silent. Those who ignored her were now remembering. And Donovan, who had always been the most feared voice in the company, was now the one no one wanted to hear. The echo of her absence was louder than any board meeting, and worst of all, at no point did Ali raise a hand against him. There was no revenge, there was no exposure, just disappearance, and that, in the world of those who live by image, is the cruelest kind of judgment. Donovan was always a man accustomed to winning, not because he was kind, brilliant, or beloved, but because he learned early on that power belonged to the one who spoke least and decided most. He built an empire with cold hands and eyes that never lingered on human details. To him, emotions were weaknesses and attachments were distractions. He was surrounded by paid admirers, sycophants in expensive suits, and advisors who said yes before even being asked the question. But ever since Ali disappeared, something inside him began to slowly and irreversibly break down. He started waking up earlier, not out of discipline, but out of insomnia. He began reviewing old contracts, looking for names he'd never paid attention to. He began reading each email more calmly, and strangely, he fell silent in meetings where he'd previously dominated. Employees noticed. Some said he was sick, others said he was afraid of the media. But no one suspected that what was eating away at Donovan was doubt. For the first time in his life, he asked himself, "What if I'm wrong?" That simple, toxic question followed him like a shadow. He began rethinking past decisions. quick dismissals, cold cuts, harsh words he'd never taken back. And in all these memories, one figure emerged clearly. Ali, standing before him, not yelling, not crying, not asking for anything. One afternoon, Donovan went out alone, without security, without aids. He went to the building where Marlene, Ali's mother, had lived before she died. The place was different now, revitalized by a community art and education project. He entered as a visitor, unannounced. He walked through narrow hallways until a coordinator recognized him. "You're the CEO of Hawthorne, aren't you?" He nodded. She smiled, not reverently but restrainedly. "Ali left an impact here. Many of our young people today draw because of her." Donovan remained silent, staring at a mural made by teenagers. He recognized traces of Ali's style there, the intense colors, the irregular contours, the subtle melancholy hidden behind the light. This was no ordinary art. It was raw memory. Without saying anything, he pulled a small card from his pocket, a printed invitation to the company's upcoming exhibition, where they were trying to make up for the damage with a diversity and inclusion showcase. He handed it to the coordinator. She accepted, but didn't respond. She knew Ali wouldn't go, and neither did he. But still, she let him. Back at the office, Donovan sat in his glass-enclosed office. For the first time in years, he turned off his computer before the end of the workday. He watched the sky darken, and in his mind, there were no charts, no profits, no investors. There was the image of a girl kneeling collecting pencils, and of a woman who made him see all this, simply by her absence. This was the transformation. There were no public apologies, no emotional videos. Just silence. And within him, for the first time, the recognition that power without conscience is just a more elegant form of violence, and that he had perpetuated this for years. It happened on a random afternoon. No announcement, no preparation, no stage. Donovan had been invited to visit an NGO in Brooklyn that was making a name for itself with social projects involving art, entrepreneurship, and the rehabilitation of vulnerable youth. The invitation had come from the institution's new cultural director, a strong woman involved in public policy and corporate partnerships. Her name didn't catch his eye, but the logo on the invitation did. It was a crooked castle, small, in the lower left corner, and a star at the top. That image made him stop. For a moment he felt a chill run down his spine. He considered refusing. But something inside him, perhaps guilt, perhaps the need to see what he couldn't bury, drew him there. He arrived with a driver, but got out alone. The building was old on the outside, but I lived inside. Walls covered in murals, young people with paint on their fingers, voices echoing ideas. Donovan walked like a stranger in a world that didn't belong to him. The receptionist recognized him, but didn't smile. He simply pointed, "Last room in the hallway on the left." He followed, and when he turned the corner, he stopped. There she was, with her back to him, organizing canvases, papers, and brushes. She wore a simple blouse, old jeans, and her hair tied up in a makeshift bun. There was paint on her hands, but her gestures were the same, controlled, precise, human. "Ali." His voice was low, almost trembling. She stopped. She didn't turn around immediately. She closed her eyes for a second, as if she'd known this moment would come sooner or later. She turned slowly, and then she looked at him, directly. No anger, no smile, just a full gaze, full of memories, pain, silence. They stood there, still, two worlds that had collided once and now met again, not as enemies but as pieces of a crooked puzzle that time had forced together. "You knew then," she said matter-of-factly. He nodded. He wanted to speak, to say everything that weighed on his chest, that he regretted it, that he admired. Her, that he now saw what he hadn't seen before. But nothing came out. Ali continued, "You didn't have to come. I already said what I needed to when I left." Donovan took a deep breath. "I didn't come to justify myself, or to try to rewrite what I did. I just needed to see for myself that you won, and that I never saw you." For a moment, Ali looked away, as if gasping for air. Then she looked back at him. "I didn't come here to defeat anyone, Mr. Hawthorne. I just wanted to exist in peace." He nodded. The silence returned, but this time it was different, a silence of understanding. She walked to one of the tables and picked up a sheet of paper. She handed it to him. It was a drawing, a blurry but clear reflection. A man sitting before a mirror that didn't show his face, only a crooked, old, crumbling castle. Donovan held the paper with steady hands. He didn't ask what it meant. He knew. There he was. There she was. And there it all was. They didn't say goodbye. He just left. And for the first time since building his empire, Donovan understood. Sometimes greatness lies in not having the last word. Donovan didn't return to the car immediately. He walked the streets of Brooklyn, as if searching for signs at every corner. The drawing was still in his hands, folded carefully, as if it were a fragile artifact. There was something about that moment that left him suspended in time, as if the world around him had slowed down so he could take it all in, piece by piece. He didn't expect redemption, nor did he deserve it. But there was something inside him that begged for her to at least recognize the effort of seeing things differently. And so he returned the next day. This time he waited at the entrance. He humbly asked the receptionist to let her know he was there. No rush, no insistence. 40 minutes passed before Ali appeared in the hallway. Her hands were still dirty with pastels, her apron stained, her eyes tired. She wasn't hostile, nor warm. She was just firm, like someone who's learned that listening isn't accepting, and that forgiving isn't bowing. Donovan stood up, took a deep breath. "I didn't come to justify myself again. I wanted to thank you for not doing to my image what I did to your story." Ali listened, silent. He continued, "You could have exposed me. You could have taken revenge, but you chose to disappear. That hurt more than any scandal, and I needed to understand why." She crossed her arms, not in defense, but in self-restraint. Her eyes held the firmness of someone who has cried too much, and then she answered with a calm that cut through her, "Because I'm not you, Donovan." He lowered his gaze, touched as never before. She continued, "I grew up ignored, despised. I watched my mother die invisible, scrubbing the floors of a building that never recognized her worth. I could scream, yes, but that would put me in the same place you occupied for years, that of someone who hurts to feel whole." Donovan didn't reply. He just listened, and that, for Ali, was enough. She then took an envelope from her pocket and handed it to him. "This is all I have to return to you." Inside was a simple sheet of paper, a Hawthorne Foundation scholarship agreement with her name and account number. It was unsigned. It was folded, clean, and untouched. Donovan looked confused. She added, "I didn't use the money. I turned my pain into something greater. I created my own path, without your crumbs." He meant it. Wasn't crumbs, that the value was real. But he understood in that moment that the highest price was what she had already paid, with contempt, with silence, with the lack of recognition. And now, returning, it was her final way of showing that she never needed anyone's permission to succeed. Ali took a step back. "You saw me, Donovan. Too late, perhaps, but you saw. That is enough." He turned to head back down the hallway. He tried to say something, anything, but the words died in his throat. There was no more room for speech or formal repentance. There was only one decision, that of a woman who chose not to carry a grudge, but also not to carry anyone with her. And as she walked away, the light sound of her footsteps seemed to say what her mouth would never utter: "I forgive you, but I'm never coming back." On the rooftop of Hawthorne Enterprises, a new exhibition was about to open. It was the company's attempt to reinvent itself in the face of public weariness, now embracing a discourse of reconnecting with human roots, polished photos, carefully written sentences by paid writers, works with a solid curation, everything meticulously rehearsed. Donovan walked through the empty gallery before the official opening. He was alone, silent, wearing a dark suit but no tie. His eyes were downcast. He carried a small black box in his hands. He stopped in front of one of the main walls, the space reserved for the exhibition's centerpiece. But that space, by some unexplained mistake or choice, was empty. He then opened the box. From inside he took out the sticker, the original, the crooked castle, the star, the drawing of the girl who was ignored, of the dream they kicked away without seeing. Donovan looked at it with silent regret. Then with his own hands, he pasted the sticker in the center of the white wall. No frame, no signature, no explanation. He took a step back. He observed. And for the first time, not as a power healer, but as a man trying to hear what he hadn't wanted to hear for a lifetime. He stood there motionless. The guests began to arrive, laughter, footsteps, glasses, but no one approached the blank wall with the small drawing. It was too simple, too small, too invisible. Except for one young woman who walked by slowly, stopped, looked at the castle and smiled discreetly. Then she walked on. Donovan didn't smile. He just stood there. The star atop the castle seemed to be lit. And in that instant, without needing to say anything, she... 1. If you've made it this far, it's because this story touched you in some way. So tell me in the comments, would you have forgiven like Ali, or would it have disappeared silently too? I want to hear your opinion. If this video touched you, leave a like. It really helps more people see this message. And if you enjoy stories with twists, poetic justice, and genuine emotion, subscribe to the channel now. There's a lot of intense stuff coming up. By the way, click on the video that's appearing on the screen now. It'll give you even more goosebumps. See you there.